I'd like to begin by thanking the organisers, JIMAS, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here and to speak alongside such esteemed speakers. And I hope that you find the lecture informative and also enjoyable. One of the most deepest questions in philosophy is, why does something exist rather than not exist? Why does something exist at all? Surely nothing should exist. And there's a striking passage in the Qur'an which sheds some kind of light on this philosophical question. And the Qur'an indicates that there was a moment before human history of human assembly before we were all allocated to bodies in this world. All of us that have lived, that are living now, and that shall come to live, were in the presence of God, Allah. And Allah asked all of us, "Who is your Lord?" And we all replied, "You are our Lord." At that moment, even the likes of Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens had no hesitation. They all answered in the affirmative. So everyone together standing equally before God, bearing witness to the divine. We are also informed by the Islamic tradition that Allah has given us, since the beginning of time, a religion, a deen, to be congruent with that reality, so that we may remind ourselves. So this prologue in heaven is what grounds us and provides us meaning and purpose for our existence. But before I expand upon that, what if you don't believe in God? Can we have meaning and purpose in our lives? Does it even matter if we have no meaning and purpose? Can man live without God? Carl Sagan, a noted atheist astronomer, in his book, The Pale Blue Dot, he concentrates on an image taken 4 billion miles away by the Voyager spacecraft. He says this, he says, "Because of the reflection of the sunlight, the Earth seems to be sitting in a beam of light as if there were some special significance in this small world. But it's just an accident of geometry and optics. Our imagined self-importance, the delusion of some prevailed position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great and developing cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all its vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves." He also says, "Who are we? We find that we live in an insignificant planet of a humdrum star lost in a galaxy tucked away in some forgotten corner of the universe in which there are far more galaxies than people." Stephen Hawking has also described man as a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet. Now, this insignificant chemical scum resides in a universe that is forever expanding. And as it continues to expand, it becomes colder and colder. In the end, there will be no stars, they will be destroyed into black holes, there will be no light, there will be no heat, and there will be no life. Not only do we, each and every one of us here, pass out of existence, but the entire human race is doomed to destruction. So I ask my atheist friends, in a horrific scenario such as this, how can we conjure up some kind of meaning in our lives? Does it really matter whether you exist at all? But some may say, well, hold on. I'm important to my life. The impact that I have has immense amounts of significance. But I just ask this, if all is to end in destruction, what does it matter what you influence at the end of the day? Whether it's the contributions to science, the research of the doctor to alleviate pain and suffering, the efforts to secure peace in the world, the sacrifices for others, the conquering of lands, the building of magnificent and illustrious buildings, writing a bestseller, to establish a family, to accumulate a fortune, to strive for further progress and prosperity, the long hours of study, our jobs, our friendships. In the end, in a final analysis, it is all pointless. No meaning whatsoever. in the end, it all amounts to nothing. Absolutely nothing. It makes no difference whatsoever. Why? Because if our lives are utterly meaningless, then whatever we fill our lives up with, whatever it may be, is also meaningless. But don't take my words for it. What do the atheists see when they look at the world, the great minds of atheism? Listen to what Voltaire said when he looked at the world. He said, "I saw a worm crawling on the earth and the bird going and destroying the worm and consuming it. Then he saw the eagle coming and destroying that bird. Then he saw a human being take his gun and shoot the eagle apart, and then the human being meets with his fellow human being on the battlefield, and killing one another, that worm enters the human being's body and devours it." He says the miseries of each are supposed to make up the good of all. Bertrand Russell, a champion of atheism who dedicated his life living a life without God. Listen to what he says here. That man is the product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving. That his origin, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his love, his beliefs are but the outcomes of accidental co-locations of atoms. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve the individual life beyond the grave. That all the labors of all the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to distinction in the vast death of the solar system. And that the whole of temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of the universe in ruins. You can see that they are captivating the cry of meaningless in the universe. Now, this may seem as a depressing depiction of man, but it is very, very consistent. Think of it like this, and this will appeal to the younger members of the audience. There are computer games that create virtual lives, that we can get married, we can have friends, get promotions, accumulate wealth, become kings and queens, and conquer lands, control armies. But when you turn the power off, those hours and days and months and years in some people's situations, do they amount to anything? Absolutely not. It amounts to nothing whatsoever. In the same way that when we live our lives 24/7, we're born, we accumulate wealth, have families, friendships, and then we die. If there's nothing beyond the grave, then it's utterly, utterly meaningless. What that means is that if life ends at the grave, then man is like a criminal sentenced to death, and the time before his sentence date, he's just killing time. So, without God, it does not make a difference whether you live, die, whether you existed at all. What about purpose? Do you have purpose if there is no God, if there is no Allah? Do you have purpose in your life? Well, without God, the universe is nothing more than a cosmic accident, a graveyard of matter. That's all it can be. But then if that is the case, then what of man? How does man fit into this picture? Then man becomes nothing more than a freak of nature. He has no goal, he has no purpose. Suppose now I was speaking and I tipped this glass over and the water spilled. It would not make any it wouldn't make any sense if you asked the question, why did you do that, Adam? And I would just simply reply, well, that's a silly question. It was an accident. There was no point. In the same way, man is a freak of nature. He is an accident. There is no point, there is no goal to his life. Listen to Stephen Jay Gould, the paleontologist from Harvard. This is how he puts it, a confessed anti-theist. He says, and this is his explanation why we are here. He says, we are here because one odd group of fish had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. That's the only reason that you are here. Because comets struck the earth and wiped out dinosaurs, thereby giving mammals a chance not otherwise available. So thank your lucky stars in a literal sense, because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age, because a small and tenuous species arising in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and by crook. And listen to what he says. He says, we may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. So man is nothing more than a byproduct of a lengthy and cruel evolutionary process. Take a little bit of stuff, take a little bit of time and chance, and what you have is this insignificant chemical scum. The product of blind process. Qualitatively, without God, you have as much purpose as a rat's life. And it would be safe to say that bacteria actually have more of a purpose than you do in the universe. So our lives are ultimately without any purpose without God. Indeed, the French existentialist philosopher Camus, he said, there is but one true serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to the most important fundamental question in philosophy. When you're struck by the absurdity of life, the next question is, why should we not commit suicide? What is the point of life? So then, in a world where we're confronted with the absurdity of life, how does modern man cope? Can he just ignore these questions and carry on living? Well, this is a very interesting question, and many psychologists have tried to answer this. Around 20 years ago, there was an article that came out in Psychology Today by Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. And what Martin Seligman did was to analyze the baby boomer generation. And he compared this generation to the previous generations. And what he found was that in this single generation, there was a tenfold increase in the number of people suffering from depression. So tenfold increase compared to any other generation before the baby boomer generation. And he said that if there was a tenfold increase in people suffering from heart disease, it would be considered an epidemic. And this was an epidemic of depression. But then he asked the interesting question, why? Why was there this seismic shift in the number of people suffering from depression? And what he discovered was astonishing. He found out that these people lost the art of living their life for some greater purpose, for some purpose greater than themselves. They lost the art of living a life that was actually real, that it had some kind of meaning. And Seligman says that when you don't have that, when that is the consequence, then you become narcissistic. Then all that you live for is yourself. And he says that if you live like that, you will become a very, very depressed person. So this question of meaning and purpose simply won't go away. Even if you think you cannot answer it, it will haunt you. So the lack of meaning and purpose in one's life is utterly inescapable. So how does modern man cope in a world with absurdity, where there's no meaning, no purpose for his existence? Now, we have to understand that this is relatively a new problem for man. It's a blip in history. Because before the 15th century, God was always assumed that when philosophers, scientists looked at the world and they wanted to provide answers, God was always in the background. God defined all aspects of reality. Think of any kind of problem, political, ethical, moral, existential. God was always assumed in answering those questions. But then came the Enlightenment, where man felt that he had outgrown God. This juvenile, delinquent stage of human development, this thing called religion, this thing called God. We didn't need God anymore. We could go on without him. But in killing God, in his life, he killed himself. Now, if you're going to take something from this lecture, what I'd ask you to take is this point here. That if you do not have God in your life, that you do not have God wholeheartedly in your heart, then something else will come in its place and take its place and become a counterfeit God. That's a guarantee. You see, when we think of idolatry, the image that is conjured up in our minds is of this primitive man bowing down to this statue. We look at the Greco-Roman culture, where every city had its own idol and there were shrines around it and people would go and worship their deities. And we had Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, Ares, the god of war, Artemis, the goddess of fertility and wealth. And we know from the pre-Islamic era they had the Quraysh, the pre-Islamic Arabs, had 360 idols. Each tribe would have their totem in Makkah that they would represent their tribe and heritage, and they would worship their idol. And we know the famous story of Umar ibn Khattab, where he said that there are two things that he remembers of the time of Jahiliyyah before he was Muslim. One was one that would make him cry, one would make him laugh. Now the one that made him laugh was this, that he was going on a journey and he wanted to bless his journey. And as they did in those days, they would have an idol to bless the journey. And he couldn't find one at the time. And the only thing that he could find was a date. So he took this date and tied it around his neck. So he thought, okay, this will be my idol. So he went on his journey, and he blessed his journey, and he went along. Now, during the journey, he started to get some hunger pangs. He became very, very hungry. And unfortunately, he was ill-prepared, and he didn't have any food. So the only thing he could find was his idol, and he ended up eating his idol. Now, for us, that seems rather peculiar, this type of practice, and this was norm in that society. But when we look at our society, it's not fundamentally different from the societies of the ancients. Our societies are not that different. The actual rituals are different, but the basis is not. In our culture, is dominated with its own set of idols, whether it's priesthoods, totems, rituals. Each one has its shrines, whether office towers, spas, gyms, studios, or stadiums, where sacrifices are made in order to procure the blessings of a good life and to ward off disaster. Now, what is an idol at the end of the day? An idol is something where you want X from it, something from it, that only God can provide, only Allah can provide. And it is utterly central to your life. If you do not have it, you'll be completely depressed and lost. If you have it, you feel completely secure in your life. Now, in a secular age where age, beauty, power, money, achievement have assumed mythic proportions in our individual lives and societies, what has happened is that they've been elevated to the levels of idols. Now, we may not physically kneel down to the statue of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, but let me ask you this question, especially to the sisters. How many women here are driven to eating disorders, bulimia, anorexia, to achieve body perfect? How many women are in hospital because they simply will not eat because they have to look a certain way, the definition of beauty? There was a study recently in Grazia magazine, not that I read it, but so I've been told, and a certain number of women were asked the question, would you rather be hit by a truck or be fat? And an astronomical number of women said they'd rather be hit by a truck. Now, folks, brothers and sisters, what they're saying is that they'd rather die than to put on weight, than to be overweight. I mean, that really, really explains or shows us, demonstrates how our values have been perverted in our lives. And we stupidly judge people's character, not by their deeds, which is the classical understanding of virtue, but the way that they look. Now tell me, does it make sense to give an award to a woman, or a man if you like, for the way that they look? I mean, beauty pageants, for example, they're ludicrous. We're giving awards to a person who had nothing to do with the outcome. If you're going to give an award, give it to the parents at least. I mean, there's some kind of sense there. I mean, this is the reality that we're experiencing now. The way that we used to, see, in the old days, they used to worry about if they were good people, if they were on the Sirat al-Mustaqim, if they were on the straight path. Were they good to their neighbors? Were they good to their parents? Did they give money to the charity? Now, with the same intensity, we're worried about the lines under our eyes and the extra flab on our bellies. That's the reality. Our values are completely changed. Now, we may not actually burn incense to Artemis, the god of wealth and fertility, but how, when money and career are raised to cosmic proportions, we perform a kind of child sacrifice. Let me ask you a question here. How many fathers, because of the pressures of work, for the extra promotion, for the extra hours, for the extra money, for the extra income, do not put their children to sleep at night and read them a story? How many fathers are in this situation where we neglect our children because we want to get that extra meeting, that extra commission, that extra promotion? This is a form of child sacrifice, brothers and sisters. Now, those ancient idols were bloodthirsty and hard to appease, and the neo-idols are no different. Now, for most people, materialism is a form of spirituality. We no longer worship in the temple, the synagogue, the church, or the mosque, but we worship in shopping malls. We're armed with our talisman, the credit card. We go out there, buy new stuff, retail therapy it's called, and we make ourselves feel better. We authenticate our existence. I bought this, therefore I am happy. I buy, therefore I am, if you like. Now, and the advertising agencies have worked this out very well, how to manipulate us. Where we have these vacuums in our lives, these voids, they know how to manipulate us. They know by using advertising, marketing, branding, and the like that they can get us to buy things. A famous motivational speaker, Anthony Robbins, said, when people buy things, they're not buying the thing or the product, they're buying states. What he means by that are the emotions attached to the things, right? And we've seen this with perfume ads. You watch a perfume ad and you think, what the hell did that ad have to do with the perfume? Right? You have this guy who's driving a flashy car, comes out with a very nice suit, and he has the woman of his dreams. And does that really come with the product? No, I don't think so. Everyone's saying no here. It hasn't worked for them. So you can see what they're doing is they're manipulating us by arbitrary attachment of these emotions to these products. They know how to get us to buy. So buy this and you'll be happy. Buy this and you'll be great. Buy this and you'll be loved. So this is how we deal. Do we really have to have this? This is making me sound scary. So this is how we deal in a world without any kind of salvation. We have this pseudo-salvation consumerism. And I have a quote here by Roger Rosenblatt in the book Consuming Desires. He captures this precisely, how we compensate a world without religion, a secular world with consumerism. He says here, to have and have not, this is the essence of consumerism in America and the engine of Western capitalism. To experience a moment when acquisition of what stuff George Carlin calls stuff brings you an epiphany of sobbing, because its very being and the act of acquiring itself reminds you of the stuff you do not have or do not have yet. The thrill of the present drags you into the want of the past and then propels you into prayers for the future. The stuff is there and not there. He captivates, very, very smart. He captivates the religiosity of consumerism in our lives. So this is the reality, folks, brothers and sisters. But we all know deep down that this consumerism is not going to make us happy. We know that stuff is just hyped. We've all been there when we wanted and desired the latest product, whether it's a new gadget, iPhone, new handbag for the sisters, potentially. Well, we've all been there, that we saved up and we bought the product, and as soon as we bought the product, that novelty withers away. I mean, I remember when I got my iPhone, it was an amazing experience, right? I got the iPhone 3, there was a knock on the door, this beautiful white box was there, this cute little box. I uncovered the box, the cellophane, and I could still hear the noise. It was as if an orchestra was playing at the time, and I took it, and behold, I had arrived. My wife can support this. But now, it's like any other phone. I don't care if it gets scratched. Doesn't care what happens to it. The whole dunya is like this, brothers and sisters. The whole dunya is this, that we know deep down that the dunya will be great at that time, but it's temporal. Wither away. Now, this reminds me of a film that I watched a number of years ago called Scarface. Who's seen the film? I always get a funny reaction when I mention that film. Okay, good. The sisters have seen it, good. Usually when I give this lecture and I ask the sisters, the female members of the audience, they don't know what I'm talking about. They think it's about plastic surgery or something. But yeah, good. We have some cultured individuals in the room. So this film is about this individual who's from Cuba, I think. Yes, Cuba. And he comes at the American border, at the immigration point, and he's begging to be let through. And they're in two minds, thinking, okay, should we put this guy through, whatever. And he says, look, I've been eating squid all my life. I just want to earn a living. Just let me through. I just want to earn a decent living and make something of myself. So they let him through. So he starts working in the kitchens and starts working as a dishwasher. And what happens then, he gets involved with some crime warlords, some gangsters. He starts selling drugs. And he becomes very, very ambitious and very good at this. And the head honcho at the time, the big boss, the CEO of the crime world, says, you know, you'll go far. And he makes him more or less his partner. But then he becomes very ambitious. He kills his partner, he kills the boss, takes his position, and marries his widow, the woman that he's always wanted, admired, worshipped the floor that she walked on. So now he has everything. And there is this great scene halfway through. By the way, most people think that the climax of this film is at the end where he starts machine gunning everybody. That's not it, by the way. The climax of the film is halfway through it. All the kids are laughing. It's an 18, so I don't know why you watched it, but never mind. We need to have a discussion with your parents. But halfway through the film, there's a scene where he's in one of these really plush restaurants. The waiters are dressed like penguins. You know, he's got the finest wine on his champagne on his table, eating caviar. He has his friend, longtime friend there, and the woman of his dreams. So he has everything. And he pauses, and he has a cigar, and he says, "Is this it?" He says, "Is this it?" Everything that he dreamed for, everything that he thought that would make him happy, ended up not fulfilling him. And this is the dunya, brothers and sisters. And Oscar Wilde says something very interesting. He says, there are two types of tragedy in one's life. The first is not getting what you want, and the second is getting it. And this underpins our dilemma in this world. Clearly, the stuff is overhyped. And this is why our Lord, Allah, the one who created us, who knows us better than we know ourselves, constantly wants us to remember that fact, not to be fooled. And he says, for the life of this world is nothing but an enjoyment of self-delusion. Funny that Allah knows us. Funny that He knows the reality. So, this world will never quench the desire for transcendence. Never quench the desire to be with your Lord. To be at that beginning that I first mentioned. Now, psychologists and sociologists are discovering the pain of boredom in our lives. We don't have enough violence. We don't have enough sex in our lives. We don't have enough drugs. We have more than any other generation that has ever existed, and yet we are still not content. I don't mean ecstatically happy, but just even content. And what we do in our lives is seek these extremes. Do you know the latest BDSM kick? If you like, sadomasochism sort of thing. I know in a mosque I don't want to lower the tone, but the latest thing that they thought of, believe it or not, is that you pay someone to kidnap you. You actually pay someone to kidnap you. So what happens? You may be at work, you may be at your mother-in-law's, you may be wherever it may be. A van pulls beside you, several men with balaclavas grab you, put you in the back of the van, take you to some secret location, to some basement, and they perform all the dignities specified in the contract. Now, one of the most ingenious things of this service, if you like, is that you do not know when it's going to happen. So it adds to the excitement. So you could be walking along, you could be at work, and suddenly these men will come out. And in the end, they provide you a souvenir DVD so you can watch with your family. This is the reality, brothers and sisters. This is what the extent of that people are going to now in a world without transcendence, in a secular age. And not enough drugs. Man is constantly in a trance, cocktails of drugs, trance music, rave parties. Why? Because he just cannot bear life anymore. Life is just too boring. He creates a counter reality. Why is that? Why do we often hear of people going through these extremes in our lives? I'll tell you why. It's because people are so dead spiritually and emotionally that they seek these extremes so they can get in touch with the real existence. They've lost their real fitra. They're not in touch with their real nature anymore. And this is why the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said, the difference between the one who remembers his Lord and does not remember his Lord is the difference between the living and the dead. Look at that. What we have become in a world, in a secular age, human beings have become the walking dead, with no life, with no spirit whatsoever. So this alternative religion, if you like, materialism, simply won't do. It won't make us happy. It will not fulfill us. I only have 2 minutes, so I'm going to conclude. And the beauty that we have, the blessing, brothers and sisters, that Allah has given us from the beginning of time. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And from the beginning of time, Allah has given us a deen, a religion, so we can be congruent with that reality. And the reason that our souls are in pain, the reason that our soul aches, is because we remember, recollection of that time when we were with Allah. In this world, in this dunya, we're like fish out of water. This is not our origin. If I asked you all here, what is your origin? Some may say, be localized, say Leytonstone. Some may say Brick Lane. Some may say Pakistan, Lahore. But on a fundamental question, your origin is with your Lord. That is where you belong. And the beauty is that Allah has given us the blessings of Islam. And Islam, it is incorrect to think of Islam as a new religion. No. Islam is the continuation of messengerhood from the beginning of time, which has always reminded us who we are, what we are, and where we belong. So on that note, I shall end there. Thank you for listening. Jazakallah khair.